The maitre d' at the Gilded Spoon, arguably Boston's most exclusive dining establishment, barely glanced up from his reservation book before shaking his head, his expression politely dismissive. "I'm sorry, madam, but there appears to be no reservation under your name," I blinked, momentarily thrown. "That's impossible," I said, trying to keep the confusion from my voice. "I was invited to dinner with my husband's family, the Vances. They should already be seated." He offered a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I assure you, madam, I just checked. There is indeed a reservation for 6 under the name Michael Vance, but your name is not listed as part of the party. I'm afraid—" His voice trailed off as a sharp, familiar tone cut through the hushed ambiance of the restaurant lobby. "Oh, Olivia!" Eleanor Vance's voice rang out, practically dripping with smug amusement. "Darling, did you really think I'd include you in tonight's little family dinner?" I turned slowly. There she was, my mother-in-law, standing just a few feet away, impeccably dressed in her usual designer ensemble, her platinum blonde hair coiffed perfectly. Seated at a prime table just behind her was my husband, Michael, looking stiff and uncomfortable, his gaze darting nervously between his mother and me, but saying absolutely nothing. Beside him, his sisters, Sophia and Isabel, whispered to each other behind their hands, smirking. If you've ever dealt with a difficult mother-in-law, hit subscribe on Lifestories1. Misery loves company, right? My stomach twisted into a familiar knot of dread and humiliation, but years of enduring Eleanor Vance's subtle and not-so-subtle digs had taught me one thing: never let her see she'd gotten under my skin. I forced my expression to remain neutral, calm. "I don't understand, Eleanor," I said, my voice level. "Michael told me dinner was at 8. Eleanor's smile widened, savoring the moment. "Oh, sweetheart," she chuckled, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I didn't think you'd actually show up unannounced. This is a family dinner, and a place like the Gilded Spoon," she waved a dismissive hand, laden with expensive rings, around the opulent dining room. "Well, darling, let's be honest. It's just a little bit out of your league, don't you think?" Sophia snickered audibly behind her wineglass. Isabel suddenly found the breadbasket fascinating. "And Michael?" My husband simply gripped his fork tighter, his knuckles white, eyes fixed firmly on his water goblet. Silent. Utterly, predictably silent. The weight of public humiliation settled heavily on my shoulders. The judgment in the air felt thick enough to choke on. Guests at adjacent tables were beginning to notice, their curious glances flicking towards the unfolding drama at the entrance. I should have seen this coming. Of course, I should have. For the 7 years since Michael and I married, Eleanor had made her disapproval abundantly clear. I wasn't their kind. I didn't come from the same old-money Boston Brahmin background. I hadn't attended the right Ivy League schools. My parents were comfortable middle-class professionals, not members of the exclusive country club set Eleanor reigned over. From the moment Michael, bless his naive heart, had nervously introduced me, Eleanor had embarked on a subtle but relentless campaign to remind me, and everyone else, that I didn't belong. At first, it was passive-aggressive comments disguised as compliments. "Oh, Olivia, your taste is just so simple, isn't it?" Then came the conveniently forgotten invitations to intimate family brunches or weekend trips to their place on the Cape. Expensive, thoughtful gifts lavished on Michael for birthdays and holidays, while I received generic bath sets, or worse, nothing but empty, polite smiles. Tonight, however, she had escalated things dramatically. This wasn't a forgotten invitation or a backhanded compliment. This was a meticulously planned, public ambush. She had deliberately arranged this dinner at one of the city's most exclusive, hard-to-get-into restaurants, ensuring my name was left off the reservation, orchestrating a scenario where I would be turned away at the door, embarrassed and excluded, right in front of my silent husband and his smirking sisters. And the look on her face? Pure, unadulterated, triumphant enjoyment. The humiliation should have burned. It should have made me feel small, inadequate, desperate to flee. But as I stood there, under the weight of her smug stare and Michael's cowardly silence, something inside me didn't break. It clicked. A switch flipped. Years of swallowing my pride, making excuses for her behavior, pretending not to notice Michael's lack of support. It all coalesced into a sudden, cold clarity. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that wiped the smugness from Eleanor's face for just a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Then, without taking my eyes off her, I turned back to the still hovering maitre d'. "Would you be so kind?" I asked, my voice suddenly smooth, confident, carrying easily in the hushed room, "as to ask the owner, Mr. Croft, to come out here for a moment. Please tell him Olivia is here." Eleanor let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, please! Don't be ridiculous, Olivia. Do you really think the owner of the Gilded Spoon," she emphasized the name, "is going to interrupt his evening just because you asked?" The maitre d' hesitated, caught between Eleanor's obvious social standing and my unexpected calm authority. But before he could stammer a response, a deep, resonant voice cut through the tension from the archway leading into the main dining room. "Olivia? Is that you?" I turned, my smile widening genuinely now. Stepping into view was Mr. Julian Croft himself, the owner and renowned visionary behind the Gilded Spoon and several other acclaimed establishments. A distinguished man in his early 50s, Julian Croft exuded refined elegance. Perfectly tailored suit, salt and pepper hair, the quiet confidence of someone at the absolute top of his game. Eleanor's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she registered the way Julian Croft was looking at me. Not with the polite indifference reserved for unknown guests, but with genuine warmth, recognition, and pleasure. "Julian," I greeted him easily, stepping forward slightly. "It's wonderful to see you. It's been too long." His gaze flickered briefly towards Eleanor, then Michael and his sisters, taking in the tense tableau, before settling back on me, a question in his eyes. "It has indeed," he replied smoothly. "What brings you here tonight?" "I wasn't expecting you." I gestured lightly towards the Vance family table, where expressions were rapidly shifting from smug amusement to dawning uncertainty. "Apparently," I said, keeping my tone light, conversational, "I wasn't actually included on the reservation my husband's family made. A bit of an oversight, wouldn't you say?" Julian Croft's eyes darkened for a split second as he instantly grasped the unspoken subtext, the deliberate slight. Then, just as quickly, a polite, professional smile curved his lips. "An oversight? Well," he declared firmly, "that simply won't do at all." Eleanor Vance scoffed, crossing her arms protectively over her expensive silk blouse. "Oh, please, Julian," she interjected, trying to regain control of the situation, her voice laced with strained disbelief. "Don't be absurd. You know how difficult it is to get a table here on a Saturday night. Surely you can't just find a seat for her now. This is a private dining establishment, not some roadside diner. One doesn't simply walk in and expect—" Julian Croft held up a hand, cutting off her indignant protest smoothly. "You are absolutely correct, Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone impeccably polite but firm. "The Gilded Spoon does not typically accommodate last-minute walk-ins, especially on a busy evening." I felt a fleeting pang of disappointment. Had I miscalculated? Had Julian changed? But before I could react, he turned pointedly towards the maitre d', who was still hovering nearby, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "However," Julian continued, his voice resonating clearly, "Olivia is not a walk-in." He paused for effect, his gaze sweeping briefly over the stunned faces at the Vance table before returning to the maitre d'. "She is family." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpeting. Sophia's wineglass nearly slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Isabel's eyes darted frantically between me, Julian Croft, and her mother, her mouth slightly agape, and Michael. My husband's grip tightened on his silverware until his knuckles were white, but still, astonishingly, he said nothing, did nothing. Eleanor, however, was never one to retreat easily, especially when her social dominance was threatened. She let out a high-pitched, disbelieving laugh. "Family? Oh, Julian, this is rich. You must be mistaken. This," she gestured towards me dismissively, "is Olivia, my son's wife, and I can assure you she has absolutely no connection to—" "Actually, Eleanor," I interrupted smoothly, stepping forward slightly, a confident smile playing on my lips. "Julian and I go way back. Don't we, Julian?" Eleanor narrowed her eyes, suspicion warring with confusion. "How? How could you possibly—" I leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering my voice just enough so that only our table and perhaps the immediately adjacent ones could clearly hear, adding a delicious layer of intrigue to the unfolding drama. "Well," I began, savoring the moment, "before I married Michael, before I started my current venture, I used to work in fine dining myself. It was my first passion, actually. And Julian here," I smiled warmly at him, "he was my mentor." A collective stunned silence descended upon the Vance table. Michael looked physically ill. Sophia and Isabel stared, mouths agape. Eleanor opened her mouth, likely to sputter a denial or accusation, but Julian cut her off again, his expression amused, but with an underlying steel that Eleanor clearly recognized. "Olivia isn't just some former employee I vaguely remember, Eleanor," he stated calmly, addressing my mother-in-law directly, but ensuring everyone heard. "She trained under me directly, right out of culinary school, years ago. I personally taught her almost everything she knows about Michelin star-level hospitality, kitchen management, and high-end client service. She was," he added, turning his warm gaze back to me, "quite frankly, one of the most naturally talented and hard-working students I ever had the pleasure of mentoring." Eleanor's jaw tightened visibly. This was definitively not going according to her carefully orchestrated plan. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, the frantic recalculation as she realized the narrative she had so carefully constructed. Me as the unsophisticated outsider, the woman barely worthy of marrying into her precious family, was crumbling before her very eyes. She had spent years trying to belittle me, to undermine my confidence, relying on the assumption that my background was something to be ashamed of. But my past, the very experience she likely would have mocked, was now my source of unexpected power in this very public arena. And I wasn't finished twisting the knife just yet. I turned back to the maitre d', who was now standing at full, deferential attention. "So," I inquired sweetly, "I assume Mr. Croft's word is sufficient to find me a seat at my family's table?" The maitre d' practically tripped over himself in his haste to comply. "Of course, Ms. Olivia. Immediately. Forgive the oversight." He snapped his fingers, signaling for a nearby waiter, who hurried over with a crisp white linen napkin and gleaming silverware, beginning to set a place for me at the Vance table, right next to my silent, shell-shocked husband. "Oh, look!" I mused aloud, feigning innocent surprise as the waiter smoothly arranged the setting. "It seems there actually was plenty of room after all. How fortunate!" Eleanor's face turned a shade of puce I had never witnessed before. Her fingers curled into tight fists against the pristine white tablecloth. "This is utterly ridiculous," she hissed under her breath, leaning towards me, her voice vibrating with fury. I leaned in just slightly, matching her posture, lowering my voice so only she could hear clearly. "What's truly ridiculous—" "Us, Eleanor," I whispered back, my smile unwavering, "is that you honestly thought you could humiliate me like this, in public, and actually get away with it." Her nostrils flared. "You are being unnecessarily dramatic and causing a scene." I shrugged lightly, leaning back in my chair as the waiter finished setting my place. "Am I? I thought I was just enjoying a lovely dinner out with my family. Isn't that what you intended?" Before she could formulate another venomous retort, Julian Croft patted my shoulder paternally. "I'll have Chef send over something special just for you, Olivia. A little welcome back." Eleanor looked like she might actually choke. "Something special?" Julian smiled benignly. "On the house, of course. Consider it a perk of being family." Eleanor was visibly seething now, trapped between her desire to maintain her composure in front of the restaurant's elite clientele and her fury at being so thoroughly outmaneuvered. There was absolutely nothing she could do without causing an even bigger scene. Michael, still silent, finally reached for his wine glass, his hand trembling slightly. I caught a flicker of something unreadable in his expression as he took a large gulp. Was it relief that the immediate confrontation was over? Embarrassment? Or perhaps, just perhaps, a dawning, terrified realization of his mother's miscalculation and his own complicity? I wasn't sure. But what I did know, with absolute certainty, was that this dinner had only just begun. And Eleanor Vance? She was going to regret every single condescending word, every manipulative tactic she had ever aimed my way. She thought she could dismiss me? She was about to find out just how wrong she was. The waiter returned, placing before me not the standard restaurant breadbasket, but an elegant silver plate bearing a delicate, artfully arranged amuse-bouche, a complimentary creation from the chef, courtesy of Julian Croft. "Compliments of the house, Ms. Olivia," the waiter murmured respectfully. Eleanor's expression tightened into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. "Oh my," I murmured appreciatively, picking up the small, specialized fork provided. I took a deliberately slow, savoring bite, making eye contact briefly with Eleanor over the rim of my water glass. The taste was exquisite, but the real flavor was the deliciously tense silence that had descended upon the Vance family table. Sophia and Isabel exchanged wary, uncertain glances across the table. Their earlier amusement entirely vanished. Michael continued his intense study of his wineglass, as if it held the secrets of the universe. Eleanor, however, regrouped quickly. She wasn't the type to concede defeat easily. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her own expensive wine before placing the glass down with just a fraction too much force, the soft click loud in the strained silence. "Well," she said, forcing a brittle, overly bright smile, "I suppose it's only natural that someone with your background would know people in the hospitality industry." I arched a curious eyebrow, waiting. "Hospitality?" Eleanor waved a vague, dismissive hand, her tone dripping with faux politeness, loud enough for Michael and the girls to hear clearly. "You know, darling, the service industries, waiting tables, kitchen work. Perfectly respectable for some, of course, but not exactly the kind of careers we're accustomed to in this family, are they?" Ah, there it was. The crux of her disdain, laid bare beneath the thinnest veneer of civility. This wasn't just about a dinner reservation. It was about reinforcing her perceived social hierarchy, reminding me, and everyone present, that in her eyes, I was, and always would be, fundamentally, other. The girl from the wrong side of the tracks who somehow snagged her precious son. I took another slow sip of my wine, refusing to take the bait directly, letting her condescension hang in the air. "You say that like it's a bad thing, Eleanor," I replied mildly. Her eyes flickered, annoyance mixing with surprise. She had clearly expected me to be rattled, defensive, perhaps even ashamed. My calm refusal to play her game seemed to throw her off balance. "I simply meant," she pressed on, recovering quickly, her smile becoming saccharine, "that it must have been quite an adjustment for you, marrying into a family like ours, learning our ways." Her tone was light, almost teasing, but the implication was clear. I was an outsider who needed to be taught, molded, elevated. And still, Michael said nothing. Not a word, not a glance in my direction, not a flicker of defense. My gaze shifted to him then, really studying him, the way his shoulders were hunched, the way he resolutely avoided meeting anyone's eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his water glass again. And in that moment, a profound, sickening realization washed over me. This wasn't just about Eleanor's cruelty anymore. It was fundamentally about Michael's silence, his complicity, because this public humiliation wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of smaller aggressions, quieter dismissals, all of which he had passively allowed. I remembered our wedding weekend, how Eleanor had accidentally forgotten to invite my parents and siblings to the intimate rehearsal dinner, leaving them awkwardly excluded. I remembered the first Christmas after we were married, when Eleanor, in front of the entire extended family, gifted me a cookbook pointedly titled Simple Recipes for the Clueless Wife, while giving Michael a lavish cashmere sweater. I remembered last summer, at a charity gala, overhearing Eleanor telling one of her society friends how terribly fortunate I was that Michael had taken a chance on someone like me. And every single time, Michael had stood by silently. He'd offered flimsy excuses later. You know how Mom is. She didn't mean it like that. It's easier just to let it go. But he had never once stood up for me, never defended me, never challenged his mother's behavior directly. I had always been the one expected to smooth things over, to swallow the hurt, to avoid conflict for Michael's sake. But this was different. This wasn't just a passive-aggressive comment easily brushed aside. This was a deliberate, public, orchestrated attempt to degrade me. And he had sat there, fully aware of his mother's plan, because how could he not be, and let it happen? He had chosen his mother's approval over his wife's dignity. Again. I carefully set my wine glass down on the table, the movement slow, precise. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows lightly on the crisp linen, commanding the attention of the entire table. Eleanor, I said, my voice smooth, even, deceptively calm. Do you know what the real difference is between you and me? She tilted her head, curiosity warring with suspicion in her narrowed eyes. I smiled, a genuine smile this time, but one devoid of warmth. I worked for everything I have. A sharp, stunned silence fell. Sophia gasped audibly. Isabel pressed her lips together tightly, as if suppressing a forbidden thought. Michael flinched as if struck. Eleanor's face hardened instantly. Excuse me? You heard me, I replied, my gaze unwavering. Are you trying to imply, Eleanor began, her voice dangerously low, that I haven't worked for what I have? I let her question hang there, unanswered, letting the implication resonate. Then, before she could formulate another indignant response, I added softly, but clearly, I didn't marry into wealth, Eleanor. I didn't inherit status or a portfolio of blue-chip stocks from Daddy. I built my career, my savings, my investments, from the ground up, through hard work and skill. I gestured around the table, at the elegant surroundings. And yet, I paused, letting my gaze linger on Michael for a beat. Here we both are, sitting at the same exclusive restaurant, eating the same exquisitely prepared food, enjoying the same level of respect. I nodded slightly towards where Julian Croft had disappeared back into the restaurant. From the owner. Eleanor's fingers curled tightly around her linen napkin, her knuckles white. Sophia and Isabel were no longer smirking. They looked genuinely uncomfortable now. And Michael looked like he desperately wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. For the first time since I had entered the Vance family orbit 7 years ago, I saw something flicker across Eleanor's perfectly composed face, something she usually masked flawlessly. It wasn't just anger this time. It was fear. A dawning realization, perhaps, that she had fundamentally misjudged me. She had spent years trying to convince herself, and everyone else, that I didn't belong, that I was lesser, that my success was merely a reflection of her son's generosity. But now, confronted with my calm confidence, my connection to the owner, my refusal to be intimidated, she was starting to see the truth. And the truth was, I was not someone she could easily break or dismiss. I casually picked up my fork again, turning my attention back to the delicious amuse-bouche. Oh, and Eleanor? I added, as if remembering an afterthought. She exhaled sharply through her nose, clearly furious at having lost control of the conversation, but unable to resist asking, What? I smiled, slow and deliberate, meeting her icy glare. You really should be more careful about who you choose to look down on. I speared a delicate morsel and placed it in my mouth, chewing slowly before adding, my voice dropping slightly but carrying undeniable weight. You never know who might actually end up holding all the cards. The tension at the table became suffocating. Eleanor, usually the conductor of every social interaction, sat stone-faced, radiating suppressed fury. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly searching for a way to regain the upper hand, to deliver a final, crushing blow. She composed herself, took a slow breath, and placed her wineglass down with a soft, deliberate click. "I see," she said finally, her voice deceptively smooth, dripping with manufactured pity. "I suppose I should commend you then, Olivia. You've certainly managed to elevate yourself far beyond your original circumstances." I simply took another sip of wine, refusing to react to the renewed insult, but she wasn't finished. "Tell me, though," she continued, her lips curving into that familiar saccharine smile that never reached her eyes, "if you're so remarkably independent, so incredibly self-made, why is it that my son," she gestured towards Michael, who seemed to shrink further into his chair, "is the one paying for your rather comfortable lifestyle? Funding that charming little boutique business of yours?" Sophia let out a tiny, almost imperceptible gasp. Isabel shifted uncomfortably. Michael flinched visibly. Eleanor's smile sharpened, sensing she'd finally hit a nerve, feeling the eyes of the table on me, waiting for my response, my expected crumble. "You talk so much about self-sufficiency," she pressed, leaning forward slightly, dropping her voice to a mocking whisper meant to wound. "But at the end of the day, darling, aren't you still just someone my son supports? Playing pretend at having a career? How charming." And there it was, her ace in the hole, the ultimate insult, designed to strip away my dignity, reinforce her narrative, put me firmly back in my perceived place. The dependent wife, living off the Vance family fortune. I let her words settle, deliberately taking in Michael's continued refusal to meet my eyes, the way his sisters held their breath. And then, I laughed, not a small nervous chuckle, not a polite titter, a full, genuine, unrestrained laugh that echoed startlingly in the tense silence. Eleanor's triumphant smirk instantly faltered, replaced by baffled indignation. "I'm sorry," she snapped. "Is something amusing?" Still chuckling, I placed my napkin carefully back onto the table. "Oh, Eleanor," I said, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of my eye. I just realized how truly, spectacularly out of touch you actually are." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Excuse me?" I gestured towards Michael, my expression shifting from amusement to something akin to pity. "You think he supports me?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "You think Michael Vance is the financial powerhouse in this marriage?" "Eleanor, darling, that's adorable." Sophia made a small choking sound. Isabel's lips parted in disbelief. Michael went impossibly paler, if that were even possible. Eleanor's carefully constructed mask dropped completely, revealing raw confusion and fury. What? What are you talking about?" I sighed dramatically, leaning back slightly in my chair. "You still see him as your little boy, don't you?" I mused, looking at Michael with newfound detachment. "The provider, the successful investor, the man who generously rescued me from my supposedly lowly life." I tilted my head, meeting Eleanor's stunned gaze again. "But let me enlighten you about the reality of our financial situation, Eleanor, because it seems Michael hasn't been entirely forthcoming." Eleanor stiffened, bracing herself. "You want to know what's truly funny?" I continued, my voice calm, deliberate, each word landing like a precisely aimed dart. "Michael's impressive investment firm, his various lucrative projects, the ones that fund this lifestyle you hold so dear?" I paused, letting the suspense build. Approximately half of the initial seed capital, the money that got it all off the ground 7 years ago, came directly from my personal savings, from the money I earned and invested wisely from my culinary career, before I even met Michael. A collective, audible gasp went around the table, excluding Michael, who looked like he might faint. "What?" Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible, her entire world clearly tilting on its axis. I smiled again, but this time, there was no warmth in it at all. "Michael didn't build his career entirely alone, Eleanor," I stated flatly, my gaze finally locking onto my husband's, daring him to contradict me. When he had the brilliant idea to start his investment venture 7 years ago, he lacked sufficient capital. But I picked up my wine glass again, swirling the contents thoughtfully. I did, and I believed in him then. So, I invested. Eleanor's fingers twitched uncontrollably against the tablecloth. That's not possible, she stammered. I shrugged nonchalantly. Believe what you want. But the financial records, the initial partnership agreements, which I still possess, naturally, don't lie. The reality is, Eleanor, your son's success is built significantly on my initial investment, my financial acumen, which helped guide those early choices, and frankly, my ongoing support, which allowed him the freedom to take risks. Sophia and Isabel were now staring openly at their brother, shock and dawning comprehension on their faces. Michael remained frozen, trapped, exposed. I shook my head slowly, looking directly at Eleanor again. You think you can humiliate me by painting me as some kept woman, some dependent little housewife? Eleanor, that's laughable. Because the unvarnished truth is, I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping but clear. Michael needs me far, far more than I have ever needed him. Eleanor Vance stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief turning slowly to incandescent rage. Her carefully constructed world, built on assumptions of inherited superiority and her son's perceived success, was crumbling around her. Isabel looked like she was about to pass out. Sophia seemed utterly speechless, her gaze flicking between me, her brother, and her mother. And Michael finally opened his mouth, his voice a hoarse croak. Olivia, he began, likely intending to launch into a defense or denial. Maybe we should. I held up a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence, my patience finally exhausted. No, Michael, I said firmly, my voice ringing with newfound authority. You don't get to maybe we should me right now, not after sitting there in complete, cowardly silence while your mother systematically tried to humiliate and degrade me. You had your chance to speak up, to be a husband. You chose not to. Eleanor looked at her son then, truly looked at him, perhaps seeing his weakness, his spinelessness, clearly for the first time. The usual maternal pride in her eyes was replaced by something sharp, almost contemptuous. He had failed her. He had allowed this upstart daughter-in-law to dismantle her authority. It was a delicious, ironic role reversal. I pushed my chair back and stood up, smoothing down my dress. I believe, I announced calmly to the stunned table, I'm done here. Eleanor's nostrils flared. You can't just, she started, but I ignored her. I turned to where Julian Croft had been discreetly observing from a polite distance. Julian, I called softly, it was lovely seeing you again. Thank you, as always, for the impeccable hospitality. He inclined his head, a knowing, almost amused glint in his eyes. Always a pleasure, Olivia. Don't be a stranger. Then, I looked back at Michael one last time. Are you coming? He hesitated, his gaze darting frantically between me and his furious mother. And in that split second of indecision, I knew. He would never choose me. He would always revert to seeking Mommy's approval. He wasn't going to start being a supportive partner now. Eleanor's lips curved into a small, triumphant smile, believing she had won this round, that her son would stay put. And I smiled right back at her. Because what she didn't understand, what neither of them understood yet, was that I had already made my choice too. And they were both about to profoundly regret ever underestimating me, ever trying to put me in my place. I was about to show them exactly how powerful the woman they dismissed truly was. Michael didn't follow me out of the Gilded Spoon. Deep down, I hadn't really expected him to. Stepping out into the cool Boston night air felt like surfacing for breath after being submerged for years. My mind was sharp, clear, the path forward illuminated by the harsh glare of tonight's events. This wasn't just dinner, it was a long overdue catalyst. Pulling out my phone as the valet brought my car around, my fingers were steady as I typed a short, precise message to my attorney, Sarah Chen, coincidentally sharing the name of the lawyer from the previous story, but a different character here. Initiate the process. First thing tomorrow. The reply came back within seconds. Understood. Draft of settlement proposal by noon. Divorce. The word hung in the air, no longer scary, just necessary. The real fear, I realized, wasn't ending the marriage. It was the thought of enduring one more day within its suffocating, dishonest confines. Eleanor's stunt tonight hadn't broken me, it had liberated me. Arriving back at the sleek, modern penthouse apartment overlooking the Charles River, the apartment Eleanor likely assumed Michael paid for, I didn't waste time. I bypassed the bedroom initially and went straight to the home office, the one Michael used for his investment firm's dealings. I opened the large, state-of-the-art safe. The passcode, predictably, one of his old college sports numbers, never changed. Inside lay the meticulously organized financial records, bank statements, investment portfolios, business agreements, and the key document, the initial seed funding and partnership contract for his primary investment venture, the one clearly outlining my majority stake, due to providing the bulk of the original capital. I took several clear photos of the critical clauses with my phone, then placed the document back exactly as I found it. No need to take the original. The digital copies, along with the ones Sarah Chen already possessed, were sufficient. Then, I went to our shared walk-in closet. Calmly, methodically, I pulled out a large suitcase and began packing my essentials. Not with anger, not with frantic haste, but with the quiet efficiency of someone executing a well-considered plan. This wasn't an emotional reaction. It was a strategic departure. By the time Michael walked through the front door nearly an hour later, looking drained and apprehensive, I was sitting calmly on the living room sofa, my suitcase standing neatly beside me. He stopped short in the doorway, staring, comprehension slowly dawning. "Olivia?" he stammered. I tilted my head slightly. "Took you long enough." His eyes darted from me to the suitcase, his breath catching. What are you doing?" I stood up, smoothing my dress, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Leaving, Michael." His mouth opened, then closed again. No words came out. "You made your choice tonight," I continued evenly. "Back there at the restaurant, when your mother orchestrated that entire humiliating scene, and you just sat there, silent. Again." He ran a hand through his hair, looking flustered. I was trying to keep the peace, Olivia. You know how she gets." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Peace?" "Michael, she deliberately excluded me, insulted my background, tried to make me feel worthless in front of strangers. And you call staying silent keeping the peace? No, that's called cowardice." "It's complicated," he protested weakly. "She's my mother." "And I stated calmly, am supposed to be your wife, your partner, the person you defend. I was patient for years, Michael. I gave you countless chances to stand up, to draw a line. But tonight, I shook my head slowly. Tonight, I finally saw you clearly. And I'm done. Olivia, please," he pleaded, taking a step towards me. "Let's just talk about this. We can work it in—" "No," I interrupted firmly. "That's the problem, Michael. There's nothing left to talk about. No amount of talking changes who you are, who you choose to prioritize." I picked up my suitcase handle, the weight familiar, manageable. I brushed past him towards the door. Just as I reached it, his voice came from behind me, low and suddenly hard. "I'll fight you on this, Olivia." I turned back slowly. "Fight me on what?" His face darkened, shifting from pleading to anger. "The divorce. If you think you're just going to walk away from this marriage with half of everything I've built, you are sorely mistaken." I stared at him for a long moment, a flicker of pity mixing with my resolve. Then I smiled, a genuinely amused smile this time. "Oh, Michael," I said softly, "you really, really should have read your own business contracts more carefully over the years." Confusion flickered across his face again. What are you talking about? The investment firm, I clarified patiently. Your success. You wouldn't even have half of what you think you own if it weren't for my initial investment capital 7 years ago. Remember? His face drained of color as the implication hit him. And guess what? I let the moment hang, savoring his dawning horror. I have all the original agreements, the bank transfers, the legal paperwork meticulously documented to prove it. He staggered back a step, gripping the doorframe for support. No, that's not possible, isn't it? I countered smoothly. I let you use my money, Michael. I let you build something, hoping you'd grow into the partnership. But ownership, legal control, that, I smiled again, never actually transferred fully to you. You just assumed it did, because you never bothered with the details, did you? Panic flared in his eyes as the reality of his precarious financial situation, a situation entirely dependent on me, crashed down upon him. He thought he held the power, the financial leverage to threaten me. He had absolutely no idea. He opened his mouth, likely to bluster or threaten again, but I cut him off one last time. I'll be staying at the penthouse, I said, adjusting the strap of my shoulder bag. His brow furrowed in confusion. What penthouse? I smiled, tilting my head slightly. Oh, Michael, the one downtown? The one you think you own? I watched his confusion morph instantly into disbelief, then sheer panic. The one overlooking the common? He asked, his voice uneven. The one I bought with the one I bought, I corrected gently. Structured under a trust in my name for tax efficiency years ago, using returns from my initial investments? Yes, that one. I had Sarah review the ownership documents earlier today. It was never legally yours, Michael, just another detail you overlooked. I reached into my bag, pulled out a crisp legal notice confirming transfer of access, and tossed it onto the nearby console table. He stared at it, then back at me, his hands shaking. You can't just take everything. I'm not taking anything that wasn't already mine, Michael, I replied calmly. I'm simply reclaiming what belongs to me. He looked utterly broken then, the swagger gone, replaced by the terrified realization of his own monumental folly. This was the man who had chosen his mother's approval over his wife's dignity, and now he had lost both. I don't understand, he muttered, shaking his head. Why are you doing this? And in that moment, answering him, I felt completely, undeniably free. Because, Michael, I said softly, meeting his desperate gaze one last time. I finally see my own worth. And with that, I turned, opened the door, and walked out of the penthouse, out of the marriage, and into my new life, leaving him alone amidst the ruins of the world he thought he controlled. A month later, the divorce was finalized. It had been swift, brutal, and decidedly uncontested once Michael's lawyers reviewed the financial documentation Sarah Chen presented. His attempts to fight dissolved almost instantly when faced with the irrefutable proof of my majority ownership in his firm and sole ownership of the penthouse. He was left with his salary, a considerably smaller investment portfolio than he'd imagined, and the crushing weight of his own poor choices. Eleanor, predictably, had tried to intervene, bombarding Sarah Chen with furious calls and emails, accusing me of being a gold-digging viper. Sarah handled it with cool professionalism, eventually threatening a restraining order for harassment, which finally silenced her. My mother-in-law was no longer my problem. I sat in the spacious living room of the penthouse, legs crossed, sipping a glass of excellent champagne, the late afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Common. Sarah Chen smiled across the coffee table, sliding the finalized divorce decree towards me. It's official, Olivia. You're free! I exhaled slowly, a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 7 years, running my fingers over the thick, embossed paper. Free! Just then, as if the universe had a wicked sense of humor, my phone buzzed with a text from an unsaved number. Olivia, can we talk? It was Michael. I smirked, setting my champagne glass down, and typed back a simple reply. About what? A pause, then, I don't know what to do. I shook my head, a wave of pity briefly washing over me, before being replaced by indifference. For years, I had yearned for him to step up, to be my partner, to choose us. I had waited for him to see my worth, to stand up to his mother. Now, stripped of the financial power and status I had provided, he was lost. The irony was thick. He needed me now more than ever. But I didn't need him or his toxic family at all. I typed one final message. That's not my problem anymore, Michael. Then, I blocked his number. And for good measure, I blocked Eleanor's too. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself, unequivocally. And that feeling? That was the most powerful, most liberating feeling in the world. Raising my glass to the Boston skyline, I toasted to new beginnings, built not on inherited privilege, but on hard-won independence and self-worth. Olivia's story is a powerful journey from enduring quiet humiliation within a marriage and toxic family dynamic to reclaiming her power through intelligence, foresight, and financial independence. The blatant cruelty of her mother-in-law, Eleanor, and the spineless complicity of her husband, Michael, at the restaurant served as the final catalyst, shattering the facade Olivia had maintained for years. What Eleanor and Michael failed to recognize was that Olivia wasn't just the outsider they tried to portray. She possessed hidden depths, past connections, like with the restaurant owner, Julian Croft, and crucially, significant financial leverage they were completely ignorant of due to their own arrogance and assumptions. Her calm confrontation at the dinner table, culminating in the revelation that she was the primary financial backer of Michael's career, completely dismantled their power structure. Her subsequent actions, initiating divorce, securing her assets, including majority ownership of his firm and the penthouse, and firmly establishing boundaries, demonstrate decisive action and self-preservation. This narrative offers several key lessons. Never underestimate someone based on perceived background or assumptions. Financial independence within a relationship is crucial for maintaining personal power and agency. Thoroughly understanding contracts and legal documents is vital, as ignorance can have devastating consequences. Standing up to bullies, especially within family dynamics, requires immense courage, but is essential for self-respect. And ultimately, true freedom often comes from recognizing one's own worth and having the strength to walk away from relationships that diminish it, choosing instead to build a future on one's own terms. Olivia's final act of blocking her ex-husband and former mother-in-law wasn't petty. It was a necessary step in prioritizing her own peace and future. Thank you for watching Olivia's story of resilience and reclaiming power on Life Stories. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself in a difficult family situation, share your experience, respectfully, in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about overcoming challenges and finding your strength. Know your worth and never let anyone diminish it. Until next time.